Welcome back to the deep dive. Um, Today we are putting aside the political noise. We're stepping away from the shouting matches on cable news, and we are really just looking under the hood of the global economy.
Yeah, we are definitely trying to tune out the static today.
Right, because we are tackling a topic that, well, it feels like it's been in the headlines every single week for the last decade, usually accompanied by a lot of exclamation points and red arrows pointing down.
Oh, it really has. It is the perennial end of the world financial story. I mean, if you scroll through your feed right now, you will almost certainly find someone predicting the absolute collapse of the current order.
Exactly. And we're talking about the U.S. dollar, specifically the supposed death of the U.S. dollar. You see the headlines all the time. The petrodollar is dead. The BRICS nations are launching a gold-backed currency. China is taking over. Hyperinflation is coming.
Right. It paints this picture of an imminent, unavoidable collapse, like it's just a matter of days.
But today, we are doing something totally different. We have a stack of source material here. Really deep research, articles and economic papers and historical analyses that argue the exact opposite.
Yeah, we are stripping away the rhetoric. We aren't interested in what politicians say about the dollar or, what rolled bugs desperately want to happen to the dollar. We're interested in what our source material calls the cold mechanics of how the global financial machine actually works.
Cold mechanics. That is the phrase that really jumped out at me from the reading.
Yeah.
It implies that this isn't about popularity, right? Or military might, or even history anymore. It's about structural engineering.
That is exactly the right way to frame it. It feels less like an art and more like a physics problem.
Right.
And the core argument we are unpacking today for you is that the U.S. dollar's dominance is no longer a choice. It's not something we vote on at the UN. It's a structural necessity.
Meaning the system literally cannot function without it.
Yes. The global economy is a machine, and the dollar is the operating system.
So our mission for this deep dive is to answer the question, why? Why, despite $34 trillion in debt, despite intense political polarization, despite the rise of these massive economic rivals like China, why does the dollar remain the undisputed champion? Welcome to the deep dive. I'm Satosha.
And I'm Satoshi. And the answer lies in some deeply counterintuitive concepts, things like the Triffin dilemma and the recycling loop, and really understanding the difference between a trade deficit and just losing money.
Right, and we're also going to get to the impossible dream of the Chinese yuan. We're going to look at the math, just the raw math of why China currently cannot replace the dollar, even if they really wanted to.
It's a bold claim to make in today's media environment, but by the end of this hour, I think you will completely understand why. You will never look at a Made in China sticker or a U.S. Treasury bond the same way again.
We are going to deconstruct the machine piece by piece.
Real quick before we jump into the deep end, if you are getting value out of this show, we request you to check us out on Fountain FM. It's a value-for-value player where you actually get paid for listening without advertisements blocking your experience.
It's a great platform.
And of course, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube Music for free, or wherever you get your audio fix. As for videos, we still need to hit our goal of 1,000 subs on YouTube to start using the Mosaic AI video editor.
Mosaic is truly a game changer for small creative like us.
It really is. We can feed it a YouTube link, and it creates beautiful AI cinematic captions, infographics, and a whole lot more we're still discovering in our capability tests.
So hit that subscribe button.
As you know, we started this show with a simple idea. Is there a space for deep financial insights beyond the usual Bloomberg or CNBC chatter? We can't be more thankful that you all are as fascinated by these deep dives as we are.
The key to this vote of confidence is the research we share on our website.
Exactly. No login needed, no cookies, no trackers, and absolutely no advertisements. So please, if you want to dig deeper into the numbers, check the link in the description.
So let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Okay, so to understand the machine, we have to look at the original blueprints. And that means a quick trip back in time to set the stage. Most people listening probably know about Bretton Woods, 1944. It's in every high school history book.
Right, the famous hotel in New Hampshire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But help us understand the actual texture of that moment. Why was the dollar chosen then? Was it really just because we won the war?
Well, winning the war was a massive part of it, obviously. But it was much more about raw economic reality. Just picture the scene. It's 1944. The world is in absolute ruins. Europe is decimated. Their factories are just rubble. Japan is crushed.
The infrastructure was just gone.
Completely gone. The only major economy still standing strong with its factories completely intact,
Yeah.
its infrastructure humming, and its vaults absolutely stuffed full of gold is the United States.
We were effectively the last man standing, like the only shop open for business on the global main street.
Precisely. So when all those allied nations met at Bretton Woods to design the post-war financial order, the U.S. held all the cards, every single one. And they created a system where the U.S. dollar was the anchor. Every other currency, the franc, the pound, and the mark, they were all pegged to the dollar.
And crucially, the dollar was pegged to gold, $35 an ounce.
Yes, $35 an ounce.
This is the part that I think confuses people when they think about the modern era. Back then, the dollar was basically a claim check, right? If I was the French government and I held a stack of U.S. dollars, I could technically walk up to the U.S. Treasury and say, I don't want this paper. Give me the shiny yellow metal.
You absolutely could. It was a legal mandate. The trust in the dollar was derived entirely from the trust in the gold backing it. It was what we call a solvency-based system.
Meaning you trust the paper because you trust the hard asset sitting in a vault behind it.
Exactly. It was a literal promise. This piece of paper is as good as gold.
But then the machine broke. Or rather, we broke it. We have to fast forward a bit to 1971, the event known as the Nixon shock.
The end of an era.
Right. President Nixon goes on television. And this wasn't just some minor policy tweak that only bankers cared about. This was an absolute earthquake. Why did he do it? What was happening in the machine that forced his hand?
Well, the mechanics were failing. The U.S. was spending incredibly heavily. The Vietnam War was astronomically expensive. And we had massive domestic social programs ramping up like the Great Society.
We were printing a lot of money.
We were printing way more paper dollars than we had physical gold in the vaults to actually back them up. And sophisticated players out there, countries like France, they figured this out.
They did the math. They realized the claim checks outnumbered the gold bars.
They did. And they started sending battleships. Literally naval vessels to New York to collect their gold. They wanted to cash in their chips before the casino ran out of money. The U.S. gold reserves were draining at a genuinely alarming rate.
So Nixon sees the gold literally flying out the door and just says, stop.
Exactly. He closed the gold window, he went on TV, and effectively defaulted on the promise to convert dollars to gold for foreign central banks. In that single moment, the entire Bretton Woods system died. The dollar became a fiat currency.
Fiat. Let's define that for everyone, because we hear that word thrown around a lot by crypto enthusiasts.
Yeah.
And usually as an insult, it basically means by decree, right?
Yes. It means it is money simply because the government says it is money. It's backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the United States. There is zero metal in a vault backing your dollar bill anymore.
Now, logically, this is where the story should end. If I tell you my IOU is worth something because I have gold in my basement, and then I tell you actually the gold is gone, well, you should throw away the IOU.
Right, you would think so.
The dollar should have collapsed in 1971. The world should have panicked and moved to something else entirely.
And honestly, that was the expectation for a lot of people. And inflation did skyrocket for a while. The 1970s were a very rough economic decade. But the dollar didn't die.
It survived.
It did more than survive. Over the next 50 years, it actually became more dominant. And this brings us to the first really major insight from our source material. This is the pivot point of the whole deep dive.
Which is what?
The shift from mandate to utility. Before 1971, you used the dollar because you had to. It was the rule written down on paper at Bretton Woods. After 1971, the world kept using the dollar because they needed to. It evolved into a structural necessity.
Explain that transition for us. Why did they need to? The rule was gone. They could have used anything.
Think about the global economy as a giant network. By 1971, global trade was absolutely exploding. Countries were buying and selling oil, wheat, steel, cars, all at unprecedented volumes. They desperately needed a common language of value.
Because if you are a buyer in Thailand and a seller in Brazil, you don't want to try and barter chickens for rubber. You need a universal medium of exchange.
Right. And gold is way too heavy. It's too slow. You can't wire gold over a telex machine. You can't fly bars of bullion back and forth across the ocean for every single transaction.
It's just not practical for a modern, fast-paced economy.
Exactly. They needed something liquid. They needed something that everyone else already accepted. And the dollar was already the plumbing. It was already physically installed in every central bank and every trading desk in the world.
So it's the network effect. It's like why we all use specific social media apps or messaging platforms, you use it because everyone else you know uses it. Even if the underlying gold is gone, the utility of being on the network is just too high to leave.
Perfectly put. The dollar became the operating system of global commerce. And this leads us directly to what is probably the most misunderstood concept in all of macroeconomics, the actual engine that keeps this operating system running.
The trade deficit.
The trade deficit.
Okay, I want to pause right here and really unpack this, because when normal people hear the word deficit, we are conditioned to think failure. If I run a deficit in my household budget, I am going broke. If a local business runs a deficit, it goes bankrupt. We are trained from day one to think that surplus is good and deficit is bad.
Right, it's deeply ingrained.
But our source material argues that for the United States, the trade deficit isn't a bug in the system. It's actually a feature.
It's not just a feature. It is the absolute source of the dollar's power. It is the fuel for the engine. To understand this, we have to look at something called the Triffin dilemma.
Named after the Belgian-American economist Robert Triffin. Break this down for us. What exactly is the dilemma?
So Robert Triffin identified this massive paradox way back in the 1960s. He looked at the system and said that if a country issues the global reserve currency, it has a fundamental, unavoidable conflict of interest between its domestic needs and its global responsibilities.
Okay, what's the specific conflict?
To be the global banker, to have everyone in the world use your currency to trade, you have to provide the world with liquidity. You have to make absolutely sure there are enough dollars floating around out there for the world to actually do business.
Right, because if there are no dollars in Brazil, the Brazilian trader can't buy anything. If the world is thirsty for dollars, global trade literally stops.
Exactly. So ask yourself, how do dollars get from the U.S. Treasury into the hands of that Brazilian trader? How did they leave the United States?
We have to send them there somehow.
And we don't just hand them out as charity, right? We spend them. We buy goods from the rest of the world. We import coffee from Brazil, cars from Japan, clothes from Vietnam, electronics from Korea. When we import these things, we send American dollars out into the world.
We are exporting dollars.
Yes. That is the key shift in perspective that the sources want you to make. The U.S. exports dollars. The world sends us goods. If we exported more than we imported, if we ran a trade surplus like Germany or China does, we would be sucking dollars back into the United States.
Then the world would run dry.
The engine would seize up completely. This is the Triffin dilemma. To support global trade, the U.S. must run a persistent trade deficit. We must bleed dollars into the global system to keep the gears turning.
So when politicians stand on a debate stage and say we need to eliminate the trade deficit, we need to export more than we import, they're essentially saying we need to destroy the dollar's status as the global reserve currency.
Whether they realize the mechanics of it or not, yes. That is the direct implication. You cannot have both. You cannot be the global reserve currency and run a trade surplus. It is mathematically impossible. You have to choose. Do you want to be the world's banker or do you want to be the world's factory? You just can't be both.
Let's ground this in a real-world example from the source material. The interaction between the Brazilian trader and the South Korean electronics seller. This analogy really helped me visualize the why behind all this.
It's a brilliant example of global utility in action. So imagine a trader in Sao Paulo wants to buy a massive shipment of semiconductors from a manufacturer in Seoul. We are talking millions of dollars worth of chips.
Okay, so Brazil uses the real, South Korea uses the won.
Right, so the Brazilian calls up the Korean supplier and says, I want to buy your chips. I will wire you 50 million Brazilian reals today. What does the Korean seller do?
He probably laughs and hangs up.
He laughs. Why? Because he can't use reals in Seoul? He can't pay his factory rent with them. He can't pay his local workers with them. And he definitely can't pay his Korean taxes in reals. And frankly, he might be worried about the real's stability. It's volatile. It might drop 10% against the won by next week.
So he says, no thanks, I need one.
But the Brazilian trader doesn't have one. And the foreign exchange market for converting reals directly to won is tiny. It's what we call illiquid. You would lose an absolute fortune in transaction fees and bad exchange rates trying to find someone willing to make that specific swap.
So they are stuck, unless they use a middleman.
They need a vehicle currency, and they use the U.S. dollar. The Brazilian takes his reals and sells them for dollars. He wires the dollars to Korea. The Korean receives the dollars. He trusts the dollars completely. Maybe he converts a little bit to won to pay his workers' wages, but he probably keeps a lot of it in dollars so he can buy his own raw materials from Taiwan or Germany later.
And notice something really important here. The United States was not involved in this trade at all.
That is the critical point. We didn't buy the microchips. We didn't sell the microchips. We didn't even tax the trade. But our currency made the trade possible. The dollar is the lubricant or the oil in the engine of global trade.
And for that oil to be there in the first place.
The U.S. had to run a deficit. Those specific dollars the Brazilian used. They only existed outside the U.S. because at some point in the past, an American bought something from Brazil or somewhere else and sent those dollars abroad.
That is honestly mind-blowing when you really sit with it. The leakage of dollars through the deficit is what allows Brazil and Korea to trade with each other halfway across the world.
Correct. So when we look at the U.S. trade deficit, we shouldn't see it as losing money. We should see it as applying utility. We are providing a vital service to the entire world. We are exporting the ability to trade.
But this raises a huge question. If you are listening to this, you were probably thinking, okay, if we just keep printing paper dollars and sending them out, and we get real physical TVs and cars in return, isn't that kind of a scam? I mean, we get real stuff and they get paper, and eventually, doesn't the world just drown in that paper? Why do they keep taking it?
That is what the French finance minister in the 60s called the exorbitant privilege of the U.S. But the source material argues it's actually more of a symbiotic loop, because those dollars don't just disappear into the ether, they come home.
The recycling loop. Walk us through this.
Yeah.
Because the Korean seller now has a massive pile of dollars sitting in a bank account. And he doesn't want to just stuff stacks of $100 bills under his mattress.
Right. Cash is trash, as they say in the investment world. It earns zero interest. Inflation slowly eats its value away. If you are a massive global corporation or a foreign central bank and you have billions of dollars, you need to park that money somewhere safe where it earns a yield. You need it to be liquid, meaning you can get it back fast, and you need it to be incredibly safe.
So where do they go? Where is the safest place on Earth to park billions of dollars?
They go to the deepest, most liquid, most trustworthy financial market on the planet, the U.S. Treasury bond market.
They buy our debt.
They buy our debt. They take the exact dollars they earn from selling us goods, and they loan them right back to the U.S. government by buying T-bills.
Let's trace the whole circle to make sure we have it clear. Okay. Step 1. An American consumer buys a Korean TV. Dollars go out to Korea. Step 2. Korea now has a surplus of dollars.
Yeah.
Step 3. Korea takes those dollars and buys U.S. Treasury bonds. The dollars come right back to the U.S. government.
And the loop closes perfectly. The money returns to the mothership.
It seems like a pretty sweet deal for us.
Yeah.
What exactly do we get out of this loop?
The U.S. gets two massive distinct benefits. First, we get cheap goods. Importing all these products keeps our domestic inflation low because we can constantly buy from the absolute cheapest producers anywhere in the world. Second, and this is huge, we get incredibly cheap loans. Because the whole world desperately needs to buy our debt to store their dollars. The demand for U.S. treasuries is basically insatiable.
And high demand for bonds means low interest rates.
Exactly. That keeps our national interest rates much lower than they naturally would be. We can borrow cheaply to fund our government, our massive military, our social programs. We are effectively subsidized by the world's desperate need for financial safety.
And what does the world get? Why do they voluntarily agree to this arrangement?
They get the ultimate customer. The U.S. consumer is known as the consumer of last resort. We eagerly buy the stuff their export economies produce. If we stopped buying, their factories would close tomorrow. And crucially, they get a safe asset. This is a technical term in the reading, but it's vital to understand.
Explain safe asset for us.
Yeah.
What makes it so important?
The entire global banking system runs on collateral. If you are a bank and you want to make a big trade or take out a massive short-term loan or secure a complex derivative, you need to pledge something safe as collateral. U.S. Treasuries are the gold standard of global collateral. They are considered risk-free by the markets. So countries like China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, they physically need these treasuries to stabilize their own domestic banking systems.
So they aren't just buying our national debt to be nice or to do us a favor. They're buying it because it's the structural foundation of their own financial stability.
Exactly. It's a total symbiosis. We need their cheap goods. They need our deep liquidity and our safe assets. It's a marriage. Now, it might be a highly dysfunctional marriage at times, but a sudden divorce would completely destroy both parties.
This really reframes the whole conversation around the national debt. We usually hear about the debt as this looming catastrophic threat. Our grandchildren will be paying for this. But if the debt is actually the vital safe asset the entire world relies on to function,
then rapidly paying it off would actually be a massive problem.
Wait, really? If we magically paid off the entire national debt tomorrow,
Just think about the actual mechanics. If the U.S. government ran a surplus and paid off all its outstanding debt, there would be no more Treasury bonds in existence. The world would suddenly have no safe collateral. The global banking system would literally run out of the glue that holds all the transactions together. It would be an instant crisis.
So we have to stay in debt.
Structurally, yes. To maintain the current operating system, the U.S. must constantly supply debt to the world. A world without U.S. debt is a world without a reliable, risk-free benchmark.
That is a lot to process. It turns basically all conventional economic wisdom completely on its head.
But let's pivot to something that is very much in the news right now, and that is tariffs.
Yes, tariffs are definitely the flavor of the month in political circles. Because if the trade deficit is structurally necessary, as we just spent 20 minutes discussing, why are we seeing such a massive political push for tariffs? The prevailing political narrative is we have a trade deficit that's terrible, so we will put a 20% tax on imports, and that will magically fix the deficit.
That is the political narrative. And it sells incredibly well to voters because it sounds like common sense. But the cold mechanics we are studying tell a very different story. Our source explicitly argues that tariffs and trade deficits serve entirely different masters.
What does that phrase mean? Entirely different masters.
Well, we just established that the trade deficit is the global liquidity pump. You can't just turn it off without crashing the global trade system. So tariffs really shouldn't be viewed as a blunt tool to eliminate the macro deficit. If you successfully use tariffs to block all foreign imports, you would instantly starve the world of dollars.
Okay, so if tariffs aren't actually meant for fixing the overall deficit, what are they for?
The source material calls them guardrails.
Guardrails.
Think about the painful side effects of this whole system. We run a deficit. We buy tons of foreign goods. That is great for the dominance of the dollar, and it's great for cheap prices at big box stores, but it is incredibly hard on American manufacturers. If we buy everything from China or Mexico because it's cheaper, our domestic factories close, our workers lose their jobs, entire towns get wiped out.
The Rust Belt phenomenon, we've lived through that reality for decades.
Exactly. That is the very real domestic human cost of the Triffin dilemma. So the source argues that tariffs are actually a surgical tool. You don't use them to stop all trade everywhere. You use them to protect specific critical organs of the national body.
Like what kind of organs?
Like the steel industry, like semiconductor manufacturing, like green energy infrastructure. The core argument goes like this. Okay, we accept that we are going to import billions of dollars of plastic toys and fast fashion t-shirts. We accept the trade deficit there to provide global liquidity, but we absolutely cannot afford to lose the domestic ability to build our own military tanks or our own power grid.
So the tariff is essentially a fence. It says to the global market, hey, global capital, you can flow everywhere else, but stay out of this specific garden. We need to grow these vital plants ourselves for pure national security reasons.
Precisely. It's not about balancing the national checkbook at all. It's about preserving the hard industrial base required to remain a geopolitical superpower. It allows the U.S. to sustain the necessary global deficit without accidentally hollowing out its strategic core.
That's such a crucial distinction to make. It explains why you can have an administration that comes in and imposes really high tariffs on certain sectors, but still ends up running a record-high trade deficit overall.
Yeah.
They aren't necessarily failing at their job. They're just doing two entirely different things.
Correct. One is macro monetary policy managing the global deficit. The other is industrial security policy managing the tariffs. Confusing the two is what leads to really bad political analysis.
Okay, so we've completely built the machine now. The dollar is the global OS. The trade deficit is the engine pumping out the dollars. The recycling loop keeps the capital moving back to us safely. And tariffs act as the guardrails to keep our military-industrial complex intact. It sounds incredibly robust.
It is remarkably robust. It has survived massive crises, world wars, extreme inflation, and historic asset bubbles.
But there is always a challenger, right? And for the last decade or more, the main challenger in everyone's mind has been China.
The dragon.
Every other headline is about it. The rise of the yuan, the end of American hegemony. Saudi Arabia is considering selling oil for yuan instead of dollars. It just feels inevitable to a lot of people that the world's second largest economy, with over 1 billion people, would eventually take over the top spot. But our source material flat out calls this an impossible dream.
It uses very strong, unambiguous language. It argues that China's ambition to dethrone the U.S. dollar is fundamentally mathematically incompatible with their own internal economic model.
Why, though? China makes practically everything. They have massive gold reserves. They have a huge military. Why can't the yuan be the new reserve currency?
Because China is currently caught in what the text calls a macroeconomic trap. They are actively trying to do two things that simply cannot be done at the same time by the same country.
Break it down for us. What are the two opposing things?
Goal number one, they want to remain the world's factory. They want to absolutely dominate global exports. This is the entire source of their national wealth and, honestly, their internal political stability. And to do this, they run a massive trade surplus. They sell far more to the world than they buy from it.
Okay, so they are the exact anti-U.S. in that regard. We run the deficit, they run the surplus.
Correct. Now, goal number two. Beijing desperately wants the yuan to be the premier global reserve currency. They want the power that comes with that.
And here is the massive collision we talked about earlier.
Here is the collision. Remember what we learned about the Triffin dilemma and the engine? To be the reserve currency, you must supply the entire world with your currency. And you almost exclusively do this by running a massive trade deficit.
So if China insists on keeping their export model and running a massive surplus,
then they are constantly sucking yuan out of the global system. They are taking money and not sending it out. So there is a severe artificial scarcity of yuan globally. You simply cannot run a massive, vibrant global economy on a currency that is intentionally kept scarce.
so for the yuan to actually take over from the dollar, China would have to flip their entire national economy completely upside down. They would have to stop being the world's factory and start being the world's consumer. They would have to purposely run a massive trade deficit.
And that is something the Chinese Communist Party is utterly terrified of doing.
Why? I mean, if it gives them global supremacy, why not make the switch?
Because if they suddenly become a deficit nation, they instantly lose tens of millions of manufacturing jobs. They become heavily reliant on foreign nations for basic goods. And most importantly, they lose rigid control over their society. Because to have a truly global currency, you also need deep, open, transparent financial markets. And this brings us to the ultimate deal breaker. The final nail in the coffin for the yuan's ambitions right now.
Capital controls.
Capital controls.
I often think of this as the Hotel California problem. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
That is actually a shockingly perfect analogy for the Chinese financial system.
Explain how it works there versus how it works here in the U.S.
In the U.S., the capital markets are completely open. If you are, say, a Saudi prince or a giant Norwegian pension fund, and you buy $10 billion in U.S. treasuries, with absolute legal certainty that you can sell them tomorrow morning and wire your money to London or Tokyo or go buy a fleet of yachts, the U.S. government will not step in and stop you. It is your money.
It's totally liquid. It's free to move.
It's a true safe haven. But in China, the government maintains incredibly strict, tight control over the daily flow of money. They explicitly dictate how much money can legally leave the country on any given day. If the political winds suddenly change, or if you happen to anger the ruling party, your assets can be frozen in an instant. Your ability to move your own money out of the country can be totally blocked by a bureaucrat.
So if I'm a central banker in Brazil trying to manage my nation's reserves, am I going to put my country's life savings into a currency that I might literally not be able to get back when a crisis hits?
No. Absolutely not. It would be financial malpractice. You might use a little bit of yuan to settle a direct trade for some Chinese solar panels, but you aren't going to store your nation's wealth there. You aren't going to use it as your strategic rainy day fund.
Because a reserve currency has to be safe not just from regular market crashes, but from unpredictable political confiscation.
Exactly. This is what the source calls the tax of being the reserve currency. To wear the crown and reap the benefits, you have to open your borders financially. You have to give up a huge amount of central control. You have to let the free market dictate the daily value of your currency.
And China is simply not willing to pay that tax right now.
The CCP prioritizes internal stability and regime control above absolutely all else. Opening their capital account fully would invite massive volatility. It would let domestic money flee the country en masse if things ever got bad domestically. They just won't do it.
So as long as they maintain those strict capital controls, and as long as they stubbornly insist on running an export surplus lane,
the yuan is destined to just be a regional tool. It's a useful transaction currency for bilateral trade, sure, but it is not a global reserve currency. The The geopolitical maneuvering we see is mostly grandstanding. The dollar has no real structural rival today because no other major country is actually willing to adopt the severe structural pain required to replace it.
That is a fascinating conclusion to draw from all this. It totally reframes the whole geopolitical struggle we watch on the news. It's not that China isn't incredibly powerful, they obviously are. It's that the specific kind of power they have built, massive export dominance combined with rigid state control, is structurally incompatible with the job of being the world's banker.
They want the immense prestige without paying the structural price. And in global economics, there is always a price to pay.
So bringing it all back home to where we started, we opened by asking simply why the dollar wins.
And the definitive answer based on these cold mechanics is that the dollar wins because the United States is the only major nation on Earth willing and able to be the consumer of last resort.
The consumer of last resort. It sounds almost heroic when you phrase it exactly like that, like some kind of economic superhero whose ultimate superpower is just extreme shopping.
It kind of is, honestly. The U.S. economy acts as a giant sponge. We absorb the rest of the world's excess industrial production. We buy the stuff no one else has the domestic demand to buy. We provide the essential demand that keeps the factories running and people employed in places like Shenzhen and Stuttgart and Seoul. And we pay for all of it with the most deeply liquid, universally trusted asset ever created.
So the ultimate winning formula is having a deep, transparent legal system based on the rule of law, plus maintaining a massive, persistent trade deficit to pump out liquidity equals absolute global dominance.
That is the exact mathematical equation of the current era.
It's incredibly ironic, isn't it? The very things we worry about the most in our domestic politics, ballooning national debt, the constant trade deficit, are actually the hidden source of our global superpower status.
It really is the exorbitant privilege. And here is the provocative thought I want to leave everyone with based on the readings.
Go on, lay it on us.
We constantly call it a privilege. And sure, it's great to print pieces of paper and get real physical cars and electronics in return. It feels like we are winning the game. But really think about the heavy cost we talked about. The intense deindustrialization of America's heartland. The constant never-ending need to issue more debt just to keep the world afloat. The deep reliance on cheap foreign imports.
Is it really a privilege? Or is it actually a trap?
That is the real question to ponder. If the U.S. ever truly decided it stopped wanting to be the global consumer of last resort, if we actually listened to the politicians and truly closed the borders and perfectly balanced the national books, would that be a massive victory for the American worker? Or would we suddenly find out that the heavy burden of global leadership was actually the only thing holding our entire modern economy up?
Are we selflessly holding the world up? Or is the rest of the world secretly holding us down?
And if we suddenly stop playing the game and take our ball and go home, does the whole global machine just violently grind to a halt?
Wow, that is a genuinely heavy thought to chew on. It definitely changes how I look at the whole economy now. It's not just abstract numbers ticking on a screen or political talking points. It's a massive, deeply interconnected structural web that binds all of us together, whether we like it or not.
It truly is, and the U.S. dollar remains the giant spider sitting right at the center of that web.
Well, on that somewhat terrifying note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. If you've stuck with us this long, we really hope you feel at least a little more fluent in the hidden language of global finance.
And next time you see a sensational headline about the imminent death of the dollar, just pause and ask yourself one simple question. Who else is actually willing to run the deficit?
Exactly. Until someone else steps up to buy everything, the machine stays exactly as it is.
Thanks for listening and diving deep with us, everyone. We will catch you on the next one.
I'm Satosha.
And I'm Satoshi.